The average screen time per country. Now, the worldwide average screen time is about 6 hours and 37 minutes. We're actually comparing that to the number of hours you're awake per day. So, for example, the US is spending 42% of their time awake in front of a screen. That's almost half the day. And there are actually countries that are spending more than half the day in front of a screen. Brazil, Argentina, but no one as much as South Africa spending almost 60% of their day in front of either a phone or a TV or a computer monitor. For reference, I do this for a living. This is my job, so my screen time is pretty high as well. Every time I go to the optometrist, they always ask me how many hours I'm spending in front of a screen. I think I calculated like almost 10 to 12 when I'm working. Interesting to note, the Philippines is actually the third country on this list that spend the most time in front of screens, which I find interesting since the Philippines is actually the third country that watches me the most, just behind the United States and the United Kingdom. So maybe this helps explain some of that. Interesting to see a place like India only spending 37% of their time in front of screens, especially considering how powerful that audience is in the YouTube sphere. Imagine when that number goes even higher. T-Series is literally about to be unstoppable. Most European countries are hovering around the 30 percentile range, except for Portugal, who's almost at 50. They are the random outlier. Poland and Romania pretty high as well, though. But the highest is, in fact, Russia at almost 50%. I think the most shocking of all, though, Japan is the lowest at only 20% on the map. Of course, we're not considering all places in the world, but man, I did not expect Japan to be the lowest. Even South Korea is considerably pretty low, only at 30. What is Japan doing if they're not in front of screens all the time? I guess I'm the last person to be asking that. I really need to step away from screens. The most popular streaming service in each country, which will be interesting to compare this data to that previous map. So for the US and Canada, our top streaming service is Amazon Prime, which I actually knew that, surprisingly. About 6 out of 10 American households have American Prime, over 172 million. I have Amazon Prime. Kind of forgot about that. Meanwhile, pretty much the entirety of the Spanish-speaking world loves Netflix. Even Spain back in Europe, well, I guess Europeans in general just love Netflix. That must be why their subtitles are so good and they have so many options. Actually, this kind of explains everything. Brazil is an outlier here with Globoplay. I think that might be only a Brazilian app. I mean, yeah, its headquarters is literally in Rio, so I think that's probably the case. A majority of the Middle East also have an app called Shahid, which is an Arabic content streaming platform headquartered in Dubai. There's also Canal Plus in a majority of Africa, it seems. The only country that loves Disney Plus on the entire map is actually India. I wouldn't have expected this place to have so many Disney boos. I just made that word up right now. What are people called when they're overly obsessed with Disney? Oh, Disney adults. I feel like there could be a better term for that. Interesting that Amazon does control some countries in the Eastern Hemisphere: Japan, Taiwan, and then of all, Afghanistan. Don't really know why that is, but okay. I'm fascinated about how there are streaming service specific to certain regions of the world, like the ones we just mentioned in the Middle East, Africa, Brazil, even Egypt has one. Kind of just figured it'd be the top 3 dominating all the places like Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus. How in the world is Crunchyroll not on here? How much time would it take to earn 1 million US dollars depending on the country you're living in? The top place on this chart is actually Switzerland. It would take you 14 years and 3 months on average to get $1 million. Again, you'd probably be spending a lot of it during that 14 years. You wouldn't have it all like in your savings. There's then Singapore, Luxembourg, and the US in 4th. Look at all these countries that top the list. They're all like microstates in a way. There's Singapore out here in Asia, also Qatar and the UAE. The only 2 that I left off is actually the US and Australia, which are pretty big, but clearly these small places are the spots to be if you want to get $1 million fast. There's like a whole explanation for that, but we can get into that later. In Finland, it would take you 30 years. In Sweden, 31 years. In a lot of European countries, we start to get into the 30s. In Puerto Rico, which is a US territory, it would take you 46 years. Then it starts getting crazy. In Romania, it would on average take you over 100 years. In Russia, 136. In Thailand, 154. Finally, the lowest on this chart, Morocco, would take you 217 years to earn 1 million US dollars. I wasn't expecting to see Morocco so low. Again, this is on average. I'm sure you could be like a super rich person in Morocco and be making, $1 million a year. They definitely have that. And like I said, big difference between earning $1 million and saving $1 million. A world map of superstates from the people that lived in the year 1920. I was gonna make an Orwell 1984 joke here, but this is still way before 1984. So keep in mind, this is just after World War I or the Great War, so I'm sure a lot of these concepts were running around. We have Pan America in the Western Hemisphere. Remember, there were still colonies in certain parts of these continents, but not much. The big one being Canada, which was still under the UK at this point, so they are a part of this empire. The British wouldn't go on to lose this stuff for another 30 years, so they have pretty much their like World War II borders. This is clearly some sort of German map that brought this all together. So they were predicting a British Empire, an American Empire, and then this is the Pan-European Empire. Love zooming in on this and seeing they really did have have the old post-World War I borders in Europe. It's details like this that really make these maps more trustworthy. Finally, the last two empires is basically just the Soviet Union and then like a combined East Asian empire. This is I have to say this. I don't even know if I can let it It's 1984. Specifically, like these two places, yes. So in 1920, they pretty much thought the entire world was going to be eaten up by 5 great powers. And then, of course, there were the non-aligned countries like Ethiopia, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey. This was after the fall of the Ottomans, so they weren't sure what side they were going to join. This Pan-Europa Empire, though, pretty powerful. Because remember, at the time, the French still had all their African colonies. The Dutch had all of Indonesia. That's right, Indochina is also getting pulled down because of the French. You have a couple of Italian colonies joining as well. Portugal had some stuff. Of course, Brazil was not included in that. Kind of funny to see literally the exact opposite was actually going to happen. Instead of 5 great empires, the world has actually just been super balkanized. Who would have predicted that? In the year 1920, I think the idea of decolonization didn't even exist. Honestly, I feel like Pan-Europa would win this. They're just way too OP. A map of submarine cables connecting the British Empire in 1902. This is referred to as the all red line around the world. Now, this is before World War I, but we do have still the similar British Empire borders that we just talked about. Interesting that there was a cable directly to the Bermuda Island. Also, they had Barbados, and they were kind of island hopping their way around the globe. Of course, they had South Africa at this point too. They only chose to go to Sri Lanka, not the rest of India. They probably were going to eventually do a cable to the Middle East. And of course, they had to take care of all of Australia and New Zealand as well. I am so surprised at the fact that we were able to lay a cable across the entire globe 120 years ago. That is so early to have been able to do this, I feel. It's insane. A map showing exactly where 8 billion people live. From the big news out of 2023 is that India has passed up China in terms of the most populated country on Earth. They both are just hovering under 1.5 billion, so a majority of Earth's population is coming from Asia. The vast majority, actually. It looks like you can combine all of the Americas and still not even touch Asia. Well, that's certainly the case for Oceania. Basically, nobody lives out here. I'm sorry, Australia. Africa is a continent that will continue to grow in the next 100 years, specifically Nigeria growing very fast. Europe is just going to continue to get smashed into this weird population game of Agar.io. Crazy to think of that. If this was an Agar.io game, India and China would have 17.8% of the power. For reference, the nation with the third most people, the USA, we're only at 4.2%. I always forget just how much more people Brazil has than Mexico. It's like twice. It's almost twice. 58% of the world's population is coming out of Asia. So yeah, you have to combine all the other continents, and still you're not even close. I mean, the same data just shown in a little bit of a different way really just shows the true scope. There's also a lot of these smaller blue rectangles that are still growing, like Indonesia. But like I said, Africa here in green is growing as well. ChatGPT answers what each European country is most famous for. Let's see what arguably the most intelligent AI thinks of all these countries. So like you can almost do this same thing by just typing in the country's name into Google. I mean, for France, the Eiffel Tower pops up 3 times. ChatGPT agrees as well. But again, we're just talking about the thing that's most famous out of these countries. So Spain has flamenco dance. I would have thought it'd be like bulls or something. Port wine from Portugal? I'm afraid to admit I haven't even heard of that. Oh, okay. I don't know why I thought it was going to be like a landmark or something. I'm not really a wine person. Out of everything out of the UK, it's the Beatles, and then we also have Guinness beer in Ireland. Windmills is #1 for the Netherlands, and of course, Belgian waffles, I agree with that. Swiss chocolate, and then banking out of Luxembourg. Oktoberfest in Germany. Okay, I was a little bit worried what Germany was going to get out of ChatGPT. Glad that they went with this, not something else. Lego! That's how you know it's real. That's really the only thing I can talk about when it comes to Denmark. IKEA for Sweden. Again, this just confirms everything that I've been saying this whole time. I always forget that Skype came out of Estonia, Northern Lights in Finland, the singing revolution in Latvia, basketball, they love that in Lithuania. Interesting, Mozart out of Austria. Wow, Bosnia is literally just war in the 1990s. Croatia is Dalmatian dogs. We also have ancient Greek civilization. Funny how some of these I can predict, others are a little bit more surprising. I guess I would find this a little bit surprising out of Turkey. Mud volcanoes in Azerbaijan? What? Well, there you go. ChatGPT just helped me learn something new. Like I said, some of these are really obvious, others a bit more surprising. They're coming up with some interesting answers. Not all are quite as surprising though, I will say. The United States by percentage of population with at least a bachelor's degree. I do not have a bachelor's degree. I don't even have an AA degree, to be honest. But in my home state of California, 35 to 40% have a BA. That's actually the same for Oregon, Washington, and Utah as well. Colorado is the highest in the West with a population over 40% with a bachelor's degree. Nevada and Wyoming are a little bit lower than that compared to everybody else. Of course, unsurprisingly though, the Northeast takes their higher education very seriously. Massachusetts Massachusetts, with almost 50% of their population with a 4-year degree, which isn't surprising at all considering they have Harvard University, MIT, and all these other ones. They're just the other ones. Because so many of these schools are so prestigious, a lot of people probably come to this state to go to college. Really helps out their numbers. Looks like DC as well, though, has a high number, which, I mean, that is the capital. Shouldn't be too surprised. The lowest states on this list is West Virginia and Mississippi. Only less than a quarter of their population have a BA. I'm really going to be interested to see what this map looks like in the next 50 years. Does it stay the same, or does college rates drop? New York compared to Los Angeles size comparison. Now, keep in mind, Los Angeles is not all this. I think this could be a little bit misleading because down here, this is Orange County. Are you talking about like LA County? LA County is still pretty big though. Both these places have similar population levels, but it's clear why Manhattan is the way Manhattan is. They smash a lot of people into a very small area, so you're gonna need some pretty tall buildings for that. We in LA do not have even close to the amount of skyscrapers that New York has. You know, it's funny, looking at this map, you would think that LA would have a really good public transit system because it's just really large, the area. Like, you would think we would need it, but that is exactly the opposite case. This comparison would be very different though if they included all of the New York metropolitan area. In that instance, it is way more massive. The population density of the islands of Hawaii. For my entire life, I was always confused by this till I finally visited Hawaii. This is where everyone goes. This is where a vast majority of their population comes from. Everyone is in Oahu. That is where Honolulu, the capital, is as well. I always just assumed everyone was going to be on the Big Island. I mean, it's the Big Island. The problem with that thinking is the Big Island is big in more than one way. It is physically large, but it's also extremely tall, which makes it hard to smash people there. For that reason, most of the population is just kind of hovering along the coast, and even then, there's really not much they can do. That's kind of the case with a lot of the other islands as well. They're just kind of along the coast. That also explains why you have a vastly different experience if you visit Oahu versus like any of the other places. Probably come here and then, you know, visit at least one of the other islands. The number of 300-pound players in the NFL by year. So the NFL started off in the 60s, and there was only about 1 or 2 throughout this decade. By 1980, there was 3, which was the highest ever. And then every year it grew from there. There was a massive spike in 1987 due to the league adding replacement players during a strike. That's crazy that NFL players can just go on strike. So it dipped, but levels started to explode back in the 90s. By 1996, there were over 200 players that were over 300 pounds. In 2004, the league hit 20% for the first time and has stayed relatively flat since then. 20% of the players in the NFL are over 300 pounds. At first, I was going to say that's crazy, but then I was like, maybe that's not super crazy. You really only want your offensive line to be over 300 pounds, maybe like a defensive tackle. 2017 was when we hit our highest rate, which is 21.6%. It's still crazy though that there's almost 500 dudes that are over 300 pounds. It's literally twice my weight, and I think I wanted to join the NFL when I was a kid. I want to see this same chart with over 250 pounds. That'd be a crazy percentage too. And big thanks to my patrons. Help, this is the real Drew. I was kidnapped and that's the imposter. Argentinian the slow, depressing Portugal Schengen, Bryton follow Amatuer, $40 is allowed. JohnDenver, KirinoIsBestGirl, Phresh Animations, TheGreatRalphy, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. His ransom is 5 filet of fish, and why am I doing this? 308 Negro Arroyo Lane.